Okay folks, so I've gone ahead and selected a block of wood to use for my handle. This is some Ambonia burl, which is an Asian wood. It's a little bit darker and has a little bit more of a red color to it. I wanted a little bit of a deeper coloration in the handle on this knife. So what I've gone ahead and done is, off of my initial sketch, I've made a rough handle template just for the perimeter of the handle. As you can see, it sort of fits with the knife there and lays out where the tang is. That'll kind of give a decent idea of how this knife will look at the end of everything. And I've gone ahead and taken this pattern and laid it on my block of wood and kind of figured out the best way to fit it onto the block, and kind of has to be angled there. And then I've taken and with pencil sketched the outline for my handle on this block of wood. I don't know how well it will show up in the video here, but it does have the outline sketch there. So the next step I'm going to do is go ahead and, since I had to angle this block, obviously the tang is not angled correctly, so I need to actually trim off the end of this block at an angle to match the angle that my handle is actually going to sit on the knife, so that my tang can remain nice and centered on that block of wood. So I'm going to go ahead and trim off this little corner here at an angle on the bandsaw, and then give a really quick sand on the belt sander, and then we'll go about laying out where our tang is actually going to sit in this block of wood. And I'll show you how I drill a series of holes to open up a slot in the wood to receive the tang, and then go about doing a burn fit to actually do the final fit of the block of wood onto the tang there. So we'll go ahead and trim off this block of wood on the bandsaw and proceed. Okay, I've gone ahead and darkened up the lines just so that they show up a little bit better on camera, but I'm just going to go ahead and trim off this very corner, like I mentioned before, so that the angle of the mating surface of this block of wood will actually match the angle that the tang has to be placed at on this block of wood. So I'm just going to do that here on the bandsaw. Again, as I do this, I'm going to be extremely cautious about where I place my fingers, so as not to accidentally trim off the end of my fingertips. So to do that, I will again use a little push stick. Alright, so I've trimmed that off. It's not exactly straight, that's not a big problem. Just going to take it over the grinder and sand off that front face and make it nice and flat, and then we'll proceed with laying out the tang. Okay, now that I have the block trimmed and sanded completely flat, check my little pattern up against it just to make sure that everything still lines up, which it does. So the next step is going to be to actually lay out where the tang is going to fall. So to do that, I actually like to lay the actual tang up against the block of wood, butt up the guard against where it's going to fall, and trace around my tang. Okay, so now I've got some lines that show where that tang is going to sit within the block of wood. I got to extend them a little bit so they go all the way up to the edge of the block, but these will be the guidelines for where I actually place the slot when I slot this block of wood so that my tang can fit inside. I will use these lines to guide when I drill my holes and as I do the burn fit. So the next thing I'm going to do is figure out where the center of the thickness of this piece of wood is, extend these lines across, and then that I will use as a guideline for where to start and stop my drills, my holes when I'm drilling them, when I drill the slot. So much like when I laid out the slot for the guard, I've done something very similar here with the slot for the Tang. So I've got the Tang profile sketched on the face, and I've transferred the lines from that profile onto the top of the block of wood, where I'll actually be drilling holes to form a slot. I've also sketched a center line down this block of wood so that I can make sure that I get my drill bit nice and centered as I drill these holes. So the next thing I'm going to go ahead and do is take this over to the drill press, and I will select a drill bit that is roughly kind of the average thickness of my Tang here, a little bit thinner. You know, it'll be a little bit wider for the base of the Tang here and a little bit thicker for the top, but what I'm going to do then is take this over to the drill press, and I'll start by drilling a couple of holes that actually roughly follow this perimeter of this Tang here. Drill a couple holes and then drill a series of holes in between. Use the drill bit to kind of wallow those out and walk those open until I get a rough slot. Once I get the rough slot, the goal is just to have that slot fit very snugly, and then from there I'll actually heat the end of this Tang up and actually burn the Tang and widen that slot until it fits really perfectly and really snug. So we'll take this over to the drill press and start working on forming the slot. Alright folks, so I've gone ahead and gotten a drill bit that is roughly the same thickness as my Tang. It's a little bit skinnier than it is up here and a little bit wider than it is at the bottom, and that's perfectly fine. Gone ahead and positioned my block of wood in a drill press vise and clamped it at the proper angle and lined up my drill bit here so that it follows this outside edge of that outline of my Tang. And I have the drill bit chalked up in the chuck a little bit so that I get a nice straight hole initially, and then I'm actually going to move the drill bit down so that I can get that last quarter inch or so of the Tang length. And this will be an initial guide hole, if you will, and I'll drill one on this side, then I'll actually reposition this block and drill the other side, then I'll drill a series of holes in between the two pilot holes and use that to open up a slot. Alright, now we'll go ahead and drill that initial pilot hole. Okay, now I'll go ahead and re-angle the block and drill the back pilot hole. Alright, now that I've got the two pilot holes drilled, I'm going to go ahead and keep the block at the same angle and drill a series of holes that will connect the pilot holes. I'll drill them really close to each other, as close as I can, and these series of holes will then be, the webs will be cut in between them, and then that'll be opened up into a slot essentially for the Tang. Alright, so I've got my series of holes drilled. I will then take a plunge router spiral cutting bit, which is actually meant to cut through material as it spins. And I'll use this bit to essentially widen up these holes and cut the webbing in between them and open that up into a slot. Now this will be clamped in the drill press, and I'll actually hold the block freehand and kind of work it back and forth. so there's the initial slot. It'll definitely need to be widened up so that the Tang can enter it. As you can see, only a small portion of the Tang currently can fit in that slot. So I'll use this bit to widen it slightly and get it so that I can fit this Tang down much further. And once I get that done, then it will be time to do the burn fit. Okay folks, so now I will begin burn fitting the Tang into the pilot slot in my handle block. I like to burn fit my slots because it gives me an extremely nice tight fit. No wiggle, no gaps, nothing of that nature, which gives me a really nice solid construction as I'm building my knife. And I always like to take the time to try and fit things up extremely snug. Additionally, it tends to make the job go a little bit easier than trying to, oversize the slot and make it really large. This will be what is known as a hidden Tang knife, so the Tang itself will be completely concealed within the handle block. You won't be able to see the Tang at all. There are multiple methods for making hidden Tang knives. You can split your handle material in two and use a chisel and chisel out a little opening for your Tang slot in each side and glue the handle material back together. But that generally creates a glue seam that is visible. Whenever possible, I like to do a seamless construction, just for the visual impact as well as a little bit of a strength impact, strength component, but mostly for visual purposes. I just think it looks better without that glue seam, having a nice solid continuous handle block. And burn fitting is the easiest way I know to do this. So it's important to get a really substantial pilot slot and to get that slot nice and centered, because it's going to be guiding the Tang as you burn it on. It's also important that when you burn the Tang, or when you heat the Tang to do a burn fit, you don't overheat the Tang. Many people make the mistake of heating the entire Tang to glowing red and then burning their block on, and ultimately what happens is you overheat the block and you wallow out the hole, and then you have a very loose fit with a lot of charred material on the inside of this block of wood. What I do when I burn fit is I heat just the very tip of the Tang. Place this on there, burn down as far as I can with hand pressure. Usually takes multiple heats to get the job done. And then once I get down as far as I can with just hand pressure, I use a rubber mallet and I'll actually lightly tap on the handle block and use that paired with the heat from the end of the Tang to slowly drive this handle block down onto the Tang and give me an extremely nice tight fit. It probably won't show up in the video, but I have marked a line where the guard will be, or where the guard was. I've pulled the guard off for this process. The reason I mark out where the guard is because I want this face to go down to at least where that guard will sit. I'll actually put it down a little bit further so that I have a little bit of material I can remove as I force everything down and fit the handle block on. But that's basically the overall process. So we'll go ahead and fire up the torch and get started. So again, my goal here is to heat just the end of this Tang up to a kind of a orange or a cherry red. Like I said, you don't want to heat up too much of the Tang. So now that I've got the Tang kind of up to heat, I'll cut this off and very quickly fit my handle block down on and give it a few light taps to slowly start driving down onto that slot. Additionally, I'll like I said, it'll take multiple heats to actually get this slot formed and fitted through heat. So we'll take a few more heats and continue to just keep working this down. Another important thing to note is keep a wet, damp rag handy so that you can cool the Tang down here near the blade if it starts to get a little bit too warm. Alrighty, so I've got the slot burned in. So you can see it's a very nice, tight, snug fit on the handle block, which is exactly what we want. The next step will be to let this Tang cool off a little bit, clean it up, true up the face of this a little bit, and work on trimming out and cutting out the actual profile for the handle and start shaping it.